Hello friends, welcome to tutorial in English literature. In the last two lessons, I discussed the plot summary of the first and second volumes of Mary Shelley's literary classic Frankenstein. Today, I will analyze in detail the summary of the third volume of the novel. If you have not watched those two videos, first make sure to watch them. In the last volume, there are 9 chapters. Victor is the main narrator of most part of the plot. Here, Robert Walton's letters at the last chapter complete the frame narrative that begins in the first chapter. Before I proceed further, I want to ask you a question. In the last session, we have learned that the creature finds few books in the jungle and he goes through these books very eagerly as part of his self-education. Now, the question is, which among the following books the creature has not read? These are your options. I think you will be able to answer the question. I will tell you the answer at the end of this lesson. Now let's begin our discussion. So this volume begins in chapter 18. In the last session, we have seen that at the end of chapter 17, Victor agrees to the demand of his creature to make a mate for him and returns to Geneva. But Victor cannot bring himself to begin his work for many weeks. He fears the creature's wrath, but his disgust for the task is immense, almost overwhelming. He realizes that several months of study are needed before he can begin his work. So he determines to study in England, as the discoveries of an English philosopher will prove essential to his research. He endlessly delays asking his father for permission to visit England. His father notices this change in Victor. When his father asks Victor whether he wishes to marry Elizabeth or not, Victor reassures him that he longs to marry Elizabeth, but he wishes to visit England first. He promises his father that upon his return he will marry Elizabeth. His father immediately consents to his request, and it is agreed that Clerval will accompany Victor. In September, Victor and Clerval set out and they travel by boat through Germany and Holland. They arrive in London during the late days of December. It is clear to us that Victor invents the whole travel episode to disguise the true nature of his work. He is torn by his obligation to the creature and the fear that if he fails, there will be dire consequence for his family. As he recalls their journey, Victor is struck by the great difference between Clerval and himself. Clerval was entirely alive to the natural landscape, which he loved with unparalleled eagerness. Victor, by contrast, was full of melancholy. The next chapter describes their tour of England. They spent the winter in London, exploring that city and making plans to visit rest of England. The visit delights Clerval, while Victor broods and only visits the philosophers who have the latest scientific information. Then they go to Oxford, and a friend invites them to visit Scotland. At the end of March, they set out for Scotland. Victor grows impatient to begin his work and free himself of his bond to the creature. After visiting Edinburgh and a number of other cities in Scotland, Victor urges Henry to stay with one of his acquaintances. Henry consents reluctantly, and Victor departs for a remote, desolate island in the Orkneys to complete his project there. Here, Victor can finish his work in solitude and out of sight of anyone who may suspect his intentions. he quickly sets up a laboratory in a small shack and devotes most of his time to working on his new creature. He often has trouble continuing his work as he must gather the raw materials for a second creature. His horror at his task increases daily, in stark contrast to the enthusiasm with which he created his first creature. At times, Victor works feverishly. At other times, he would not work at all for days. His mind and heart are in a state of confusion. His body is restless and nervous. He wishes to finish his work with the hope of relief from his creature. But he also senses the forebodings of evil. In the next chapter, the creature returns. After following Victor and Henry through mainland Europe and England, the creature comes near Victor's workshop in Scotland to see his mate. One night, Victor sits in his laboratory, contemplating the possible effects of this second experiment. He is tormented while thinking that the result may be disastrous in many ways. First, the second creature may be even more malignant than the first. Second, she, unlike her mate, may refuse to quit the company of human being. Third, they may ultimately begin to hate each other's hideousness, ugliness. Finally, Victor is repulsed by the thought that the two creatures might beget children and thereby create a new race that could ultimately destroy all humanity. Victor feels that it would be the utmost selfishness to create a female companion just to get relief from his creature. At that moment, he notices the creature at the window grinning at him. As the creature looks on, Victor tears the half-finished creation to pieces. Several hours later, the creature visits Victor while he is sitting in his laboratory. The creature accuses him of having broken his promise and asks if all his hardship and suffering has been for nothing. When Victor vows never to create another being like him, the creature calls him his slave and reminds him, "You are my creator, but I am your master." He leaves with a dire warning, "I will be with you on your wedding night." Victor now speculates who will be the creature's next victim. He receives a letter from Henry Clerval urging him to come back to London to begin planning a journey to India. Victor rushes to leave this island within 2 days, once he dismantles the laboratory and hides the remains. He sets out in a boat around 2 or 3 a.m. to dispose the remaining body parts. Once the task is complete, he lays down in the boat to rest and fell fast asleep as he was extremely tired. Meanwhile, a storm arises and pushes the boat out to sea and brings him near Ireland. When the rising sun and wind awaken him, Victor finds himself in a dire situation. He makes a sail from his own clothes to steer him toward a town near Irish shore. A crowd of people observes his approach and shout that he must be the villain. Victor is immediately taken into custody, accused of murder, and sent to the local magistrate, Mr. Kirwin. So this chapter ends with a mystery. We don't know who was killed there. The mystery is revealed in the next chapter. The dead body of Henry Clerval has washed ashore. The method of death is familiar. The black marks of fingers on the neck. Since Victor appears around same time, several people suspect him of the crime, even though he had not been present there before. At least two witnesses saw a large creature deposit the body of Clerval on the beach and leave. Mr. Kirwin, the local magistrate, suggests that Victor be shown the body so that the tribunal might judge his reaction. When he sees the dead body of his friend, he becomes almost mad with grief and guilt. Victor becomes violently ill and passes 2 months near death. Victor is held in prison and Mr. Kirwin sends a nurse and a doctor to take care of him. At the trial, Kirwin defends Victor and secures Victor's release when the court learns of Victor's residence on one of the islands in Orkney. The time of the murder and Victor's presence in his lab in the Orkneys proves that he did not commit the crime. Victor's father, Alphonse, reaches Ireland to take his son back. Victor immediately asks after the safety of Elizabeth and Ernest, and his father assures him they all are well. Though Victor is cleared of all criminal charges, his life is poisoned forever. His father tries in vain to cheer him. The death of Clerval serves as a symbol for the death of the last of Victor's romantic idealism. It was Clerval who helped to focus Victor's attentions on the world beyond the purview of science. It was he who enabled Victor to delight in the simple pleasures of nature. Victor is now deprived of that joy, since he no longer has the privilege of seeing the world through Clerval's eyes. On their way home, father and son stop in Paris, where they rest a few days before continuing on to Geneva. His father urges him to take solace in society. However, company of people is disgusting to him. Victor tells his father that he is the true cause of all the catastrophes that have befallen them. But Alphonse considers his confession as a result of delirium. Elizabeth sends a letter to Victor asking if he wishes to marry some other woman. When he arrives in Geneva, he assures Elizabeth that he is ready to marry her. As Victor wants desperately to please both Elizabeth and his father, he decides to marry as soon as possible. 10 days after his return home, Victor marries Elizabeth. All is perfect on their wedding day. It is to be the last happy day in Victor's life. After the ceremony, the couple travels to Lake Como in Italy for their honeymoon. The threat of the creature weighs heavily on Victor. He arms himself with pistols and a dagger constantly. In the next chapter, we find that Victor and Elizabeth reach Lake Como safely. Night has fallen by the time they arrive. At 8 p.m., Victor and Elizabeth go to the inn where they expect to spend their honeymoon night. A storm arises during the night. The storm signals that something evil, something dangerous is going to happen in Victor's life. Victor becomes increasingly anxious. He is certain that either he or his creature will die tonight. Victor asks Elizabeth to retire to her bedchamber. Victor does not think that Elizabeth has any threat from his creature that night. Victor also worries that Elizabeth might be upset by the hideous appearance of the creature and the battle between them. He wanders in the halls to look for his foe. At that time, the creature steals into the Victor's room and strangles Elizabeth, like his other victims. Victor hears a dreadful scream. When he enters into the bedroom, he finds Elizabeth lying strangled upon the bed. The print of the creature's fingers are still fresh upon her neck. He realizes that it was never his death that the monster has been intending this night. The guilt he feels at Elizabeth's death is twofold. He both created her destroyer, the creature, and left her completely unprotected. Unable to tolerate the shock, he collapses. As other guests rush into the room, Victor tells of the presence of the creature and a search follows. Victor finds the creature grinning at him through the window pane. Victor fires his pistol, but the creature flees. Victor travels to Geneva as he does not know whether his father and brother are safe. Both Alphonse and Ernest are safe when Victor arrives. When Alphonse hears the horrible news, he is overcome with grief and dies few days later. Victor has no memory of the time that immediately followed the death of his father. He later learned that he was kept in a miserable asylum, having been declared mad. When he was released, Victor goes to a local magistrate and tells the entire story to him. It is clear that he only half believes Victor's wild tale. He tells Victor that it would be nearly impossible to pursue a superhuman being of the kind Victor has described. Now Victor is enraged. He vows that he will devote himself to the creature's destruction. Victor sets off in search of the creature to exact revenge. Victor is now indistinguishable from his creature. Both are utterly bereft, loveless, and alone. Both are sustained only by their desire to take revenge. In the chapter number 24, Victor narrates his visit to a graveyard. He visits the cemetery where William, Elizabeth, and Alphonse were buried. He wishes his dead family goodbye and promises to avenge their deaths. He curses the creature and wants retaliation for all the sorrow that has come to him. The creature is hiding nearby and begins to laugh at Victor. His laughter spurs Victor to leave Geneva forever to take revenge, and a chase begins. Victor chases the creature from Geneva to Italy. Both board a ship in the Mediterranean Sea bound for the Black Sea, and from there they reach Russia. Then they goes through the Russia and reach the frozen tundra of the northern reaches of the land near the North Pole. The weather gets worse as they travel north. There is little or no food. The creature steals a dog sledge team and is seen by local villagers to be armed and dangerous. Victor closes to within 1 mile of the creature when the ice on which both travel begins to crack and separate the two from each other. It is at this time when Robert Walton finds Victor with his dying dog team floating on an ice floe in the Arctic Ocean. Victor encourages Robert to continue the fight to destroy the creature if he does not. Hear him not. Call on the memories of William, Justin, Clarvel, Elizabeth, my father, and of the wretched Victor, and thrust your sword into his heart. I will hover near and direct the steel aright. In the final chapter, there are 5 letters written by Robert Walton to his sister. These letters complete the framing narrative that we have found at the very beginning of the novel. The first letter tells that Victor tells Walton to learn from his mistake, that knowledge for evil ends leads to disaster. Walton comforts Victor in his last days, and the two pass the time discussing other topics such as literature. Victor tells Robert that he must carry on the mission to destroy the creature. In the second letter, Walton laments at the fact that he has found a friend who is on the verge of death, and that his own mission to discover a northwest Arctic passage has failed. In the third letter, Walton writes that Victor is now dying, and Walton has a near mutiny aboard his ship. The crew wants the ship to return to warmer waters before the ship is crushed by the weight of ice. Walton rebukes the crew for their lack of adventure, and they agree to withdraw their demand to turn the ship southward to escape a certain death. In the fourth letter, Walton is in deep despair. He is now far short of his goal. His mission has failed. He informs the crew that they will return to England if they are not destroyed. In the last letter of the book, Walton tells that Victor wants to remain in this inhospitable climate, even if Walton's ship returns home. Victor will not return to Europe or England without confronting his enemy. However, Walton cannot lead the men to their deaths. Walton knows that Victor will die soon from exhaustion and exposure to the extreme cold. In the end, Victor dies. At midnight, the creature steals into the ship to view the body of his dead creator. He utters exclamations of grief and horror, but tries to escape when Walton walks into the chamber. Walton asks him to stay. The creature, overcome with emotion, says that Victor also is his victim. He asks Victor to pardon him for his crimes. The creature still feels love for his creator. Walton, though he is touched by the creature's remorse, still feels great anger at his crimes. The creature wonders why Walton does not despise Felix or the man who tried to kill him, though the creature had saved his child from drowning. The creature is sure that he can gain no sympathy from man, so he pledges to remain in the frozen north until he dies. The creature tells that he had suffered along with Victor and made evil his version of good. The creature promises no harm to Walton or his crew and leaves the ship to live out his days in the frozen land of ice. To the creature, dying is his only consolation to relieve the pain he has endured since he was given that spark of life in Ingolstadt. He swears, "I shall ascend my funeral pile triumphantly and exult in the agony of the torturing flames." With this statement, the creature leaps overboard from the ship and disappears in the mist. Thus, we can say that even in death, Victor appears to have learned nothing at all from his suffering. He commands Walton's men to continue their expedition, their adventure, thereby endangering their own lives. It is clear that the pursuit of fame and glory is still foremost in his mind. Even at the moment of his death, Victor asks Walton to continue the quest for vengeance that has brought him to such ruin and tells Walton not to forsake his high ambitions. Walton, for his part, has learned little from Victor's tale. He is very curious about how one might generate life and bitterly laments the end of his voyage. In contrast to them, the creature did not relish in his crimes. Instead, they were abhorrent to him. He is full of guilt and self-hatred. The creature feels himself to be an abortion, to be spurned at and kicked and trampled on. The creature does not feel that he has ever truly lived. Like an aborted child, he was unwanted by his parent. The creature chooses to die by fire. In this way, he can completely destroy the body that was so hated by so many people. Now let's go back to the question. The correct answer is option D, Jean-Jacques Rousseau's The Social Contract. This book was published in 1962. Jean-Jacques Rousseau was born in Geneva in 1712 and he was one of the 18th century's most important political thinkers. His work focused on the relationship between human society and the individual and contributed to the ideas that would lead eventually to the French Revolution. The social contract, with its famous opening sentence, "Man is born free and he is everywhere in chains," stated instead that people could only experience true freedom if they lived in a civil society that ensured the rights and well-being of its citizens. Here Rousseau argued against the idea that monarchs were divinely empowered to rule. Rousseau asserts that only the people who are sovereign have that all-powerful right. That's all for today. Thank you for listening.